Hello.
Queen Tut,
Yes. Hi, Jason.
how are you?
Very good. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm well, I'm well. I got your message about NASA, and I wanted to speak to you about that.
Well, in our previous interview, I did mention some of the things that had taken place in my life, in dealing, fighting a war with corruption and down in that university. I mentioned Western New Mexico University. And I also mentioned a cohort of mine who fought along with us and was a remarkable human being, Earl J. Montoya. And he is and was currently a retired NASA space manager. He had a career there for about almost 30-some years, maybe, or so. And anyone can Google Earl J. Montoya, and you can see there's pages of references to his work at NASA.
Yeah, I'm doing that right now, actually.
And we're actually very good friends. I just actually talked to him this morning. And we did a lot of work together for years. But that's where this Russian situation comes up. And I had forgotten about this, for a while. And then it hit me after that interview, like, wow, this may be the time to talk about what Earl told me about the Russians and NASA.
Yeah.
And and I'll tell you why, because how relevant is that, right? With this anti-Russian narrative.
Yeah.
What happened is when that anti-Russian narrative started to come into play about a year and a half ago or so, somewhere around that time, especially when Trump was coming in as starting to look like he was going to be the winner. I called Earl because he had told me this story I'm going to tell you in a few minutes. He had told me this story years ago. He shared a number of his experiences at NASA. Some of them very interesting, and some of them confirming some things people would be interested to know, other than the bad stuff. Okay, but this story in particular, I actually called him up when that anti-Russian narrative started coming in. I actually called Earl up and said, Earl, I'm going to write down all the details of that story you shared with me because I feel like that's going to be very relevant in the future here. And so he told it to me, and I wrote it down, and then it just hit me like last night, like, wow, this might be the opportunity to share this story.
Okay.
So here's the story. Earl J. Montoya he was actually involved in the program that got that monkey into space when they first sent the monkey up.
Right.
He's like historical, okay?
Yeah, how old a guy is he?
He's 80.
Wow, okay.
Now.
Yeah, so the pictures of him on the internet are either not him or very old.
Yeah, they're very young looking, of the ones that show Earl now from those days.
Yeah.
Anyway, Earl was in charge of multi-million-dollar budgets for the development of the space station at Western Virginia.
The ISS.
Yes.
Okay.
Although he didn't use those, let me say this, he didn't use those initials for me. He just told me the space station at Western Virginia, the development of the space station.
Okay.
When they had meetings related to this project, countries would usually send 2 to 3 representatives. Okay, and they would be accepted into these meetings, and these meetings were very important, because Earl actually supervised the lists of the people who had come, and of course that's a security measure, right? You want to make sure everyone who's coming, scientists, and that they've been, okayed to come, to go to. So they would have those meetings that usually be 2 or 3 representatives. At one point, Earl noticed that all of a sudden, I'm kind of referencing my notes as I tell you this, okay?
Sure.
Earl noticed that all of a sudden, 15 to 20 Russians were showing up at NASA out of the blue.
Or the red, as the case may be.
Or the red. True. And he said he was ordered to allocate money from these budgets to these quote unquote visiting Russians. This included living expenses And he said specifically the money came out of the space station budget.
So what time frame was this? The 1990s? This was after Perestroika?
This would be more like, I believe, the 80s, late 80s, possibly.
Okay,
It was
okay.
when Clintons were in office. Clinton was president at this time.
All right.
Okay.
Well,
That's why
so wait, that had to be 1992.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, post-perestroika. This fits in with George's Operation Paperclip 2 scenario.
Oh, that's interesting.
Isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I hadn't made that connection.
Okay,
So,
please continue, yeah.
Well, when was Clinton president from?
1992 to 2000, and then George W. Bush stole the election and became president from 2000 till 2008, then Barack Obama, 2008 to 2016, and now Donald Trump.
Okay, so that's very clear lineage there. And yes, it had to be because Earl retired sometime, he retired within 3 or 4 years after this incident, within 3 years.
Interesting.
I'll explain why, okay? So anyway, yes, that was just when the Clintons had gotten in. So that's right. There's a correlation with the Paperclip too. So Earl stated that started noticing that the expenditures related to the Russians, they discovered they were spending like a lot of money on jeans from Target.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. Because they could make a lot of money selling them back in Russia. Levi's were not imported into Russia at the time, and it was famous that selling jeans in Russia, you know, that movie Moscow on the Hudson, you could sell jeans for hundreds of dollars.
Well, see, I didn't know that I didn't know anything about that until Earl shared this with me in this narrative that I'm sharing with you. So you're right, that's correct. He said that he stated here in the notes that they got these jeans so they could sell them on the black market in Russia.
Right.
He said other team members in the program were very aware of this too and were uncomfortable with what was going on. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, apparently for Earl, there were 3 major red flags that came up during this period. Is why 15 to 20 Russians instead of 2 or 3? Why money being spent on Target, at Target on jeans?
Yeah, why is that something they can expense rather than using their own personal money?
Exactly. Okay?
Right.
And number 2, the Russians were not actually attending the meeting.
Oh, boy. That's the best part.
Okay?
Yeah.
So, and I have this listed because he's like, he's a brilliant engineer, and so my notes are kind of, written in the way that he was communicated to me. 1, 2, 3. These are the red flags. And then, and so at that point, Earl felt that there was something seriously wrong here, and of course this was important for him to talk to a superior or somebody in a higher position.
Sure.
And deal with what was going on with this situation. So he went and spoke to the director of NASA at the time, Mr. Daniel Golden.
Yes.
G-O-L.
I remember the name.
You're aware of him?
Yes.
Okay. There is a Wikipedia page on Mr. Golden.
Okay.
Okay. However, there's none on Mr. Earl Montoya, which I think that's very interesting. But there is for Mr. Golden.
Okay.
And Earl, this was a private meeting that Earl had with Mr. Golden. He told him about these expenditures and that his budget was not designed for this type of allocations. In other words, this was a problem.
Yep.
And Earl felt it was very important to bring it to his attention. So in his private meeting with Mr. Golden stated that President Clinton wanted to help out the Russians. And that's his words. Those are the words that he said to Earl.
Suddenly, now that's the worst thing you could possibly do. Okay.
Oh, exactly. So once again, Mr. Golden stated to Earl J. Montoya that President Clinton wanted to help out the Russians.
And the thing that's interesting, though, Queen Tut, is that even if he did want to do that, I would imagine, obviously the political climate was much different then. I don't personally think anything has happened between the United States and Russia between then and now that should have made our relationship worse. If anything, I would think the advent of the internet, the increased frequency of air travel, and the sort of colloquial shrinking of the world should make us closer allies with the Russians in terms of trade and political negotiations, etc. So, you know, I don't necessarily hold anything against the President of the United States, whether it's in 1992 or 2017, wanting to have economic, technological, and political interactions with the Russians, but it seems like there were, as always with the Clintons, a litany of improprieties in how it was done.
Correct. Very much so. And it was, it had to be something that was, there had to be a hidden agenda going on here because of what happens to Earl as a result of this, which I will go into in just a couple minutes here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you kind of a brief outline of the conversation where Earl responds. He gives me the conversation, right? So I have in quotes here. He says, he responds and he says, well, if this is, you know, he's in response to Mr. Golden saying Clinton wants to help out the Russians, Earl's response was, we should make this public. Okay?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, that was his first response. And Mr. Golden said to him, no, emphatically. Earl said, I can't keep the budget under control in these kind of circumstances.
Right.
And then Mr. Golden responded to him by saying, maybe you should find another position.
Pretty threatening words.
Yeah. And so at this time, Earl, he said this took place somewhere between the early 90s. He believed, you know, so we already stated where, you know, where Clinton was president. Yeah. And he said that Earl was demoted after that meeting.
Wow.
He was moved to the program manager for the Atlas program. Remember, he just went from working on the space station.
Right.
Okay.
Which at that time was obviously the biggest project they had going, I would think.
Very.
Yeah.
And like I said in the beginning, multi-million-dollar budgets.
Yeah.
That he was overseeing. So he was demoted and moved to program manager for the Atlas program. He shared with me that he stayed for 3 years so that he could get his full retirement.
Oh, right.
And during this period, it was very clear to him, oh, well, you know, he stayed only for those 3 years because he knew that his career was over, okay? Once he was demoted to that, he knew that it was related to the conversation. It was related to identifying the Russians and wanting to go public about it. And so he just stayed those extra 3 years to get his full retirement and then retired. However, during this period, he was very instrumental in getting the first Hispanic astronaut into space, Ellen Ochoa.
Oh. What about, there's a guy named Chang Diaz. There's an astronaut from Costa Rica, but maybe he wasn't the first.
I'm not familiar with him, but I am familiar with Ellen Ochoa because I, you know, looked her all up when Earl was telling me the story. And Earl is Native American. Well, he's Hispanic and slightly Native American. He grew up in Silver City, New Mexico, and came anyway. So his legacy that he wanted to leave, at least for those 3 years, knowing that it was the end of his career, was to get Ellen Ochoa in as an astronaut. And from what he said, she is the first Mexican-American astronaut.
Ah, right. Well, Franklin Ramon Chang Diaz is Costa Rican-American, so that might be the distinction.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's Costa Rica as opposed to American.
And I think he must be partly Chinese also, because Chang sounds more Chinese than Costa Rican.
That wouldn't surprise me, you know, because there's a lot of Chinese that went to Peru and all those areas down there. Now, he said that there was just one little thing that I'm going to add on here, and a little his comments. He said is that he believes that Mr. Golden was strong-armed by President Clinton.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he believes, you know, that there's no question that him protesting the Russian expenditures was a career-ending action.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yep. So that's why he was very active in helping and working with us and actually getting in the trenches with us when we were fighting the corruption at the university down there and in the community. So that's all he's done for decades since he retired, was to be an activist and try and break the lid of corruption time and time again.
You know, Queen Tut, I can't say that I know a whole lot about what I'm about to share with you, but I have heard something about the Clinton administration somehow sharing rocket technology and ballistic missile technology with the Chinese and subsequently the North Koreans in such a way that enabled the Chinese space program and furthered the Korean ballistic missile program, which is certainly very relevant today with the comments coming out of the Trump White House.
Well, I think those stories came up later, right? Yeah. Nearer to 2000 and stuff like that. That's the Chinese spy thing was coming out.
Right, China I remember reading and all that, right.
Mm-hmm.
But here we see Clinton potentially exercising influence over NASA in a way that doesn't sound so on the up and up.
Oh, absolutely not. It wasn't. You know, I mean, that is a reference. I mean, Earl had already been at NASA for at least 20 or 25 years before that incident happened.
Wow.
So he knew what the protocols were.
You know, it's amazing how well-liked Bill Clinton was as president, but how we're learning now, so many years after the fact, the reprehensible nature of so many of his actions.
Well, I knew during the time, actually, from my own experience when I was living in a city that I was doing some activism in prior to New Mexico, I already knew that Clinton was the mask of liberalism and progressivism, but really the bad guy and doing a number of things. This is way before I met Earl, but I was very aware of that because I went and started talking to people who had projects. You know, things dramatically changed when Clinton got into the presidency in the city I was in, because all of a sudden all these programs that were to help people, help them out, help them legally, help them socially, they just started going down the tubes then. They started disappearing. And I went and talked to a number of the project managers in the city I was in and started asking them questions like, what's going on? I thought Clinton was Democrat. I thought he was progressive. And they were telling me that it was Clinton's administration who was cutting all the progressive programs.
Very interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, Queen Tut, let me get this processed and put it up so that people can, go through some of this material. And I'm sure there's going to be more information that's going to come out of this once it's out there.
I'm hoping so, because I finally feel like this is an opportune time to share this information because the culture is available to accept it now.
Right.
We are now seeing that, the Clintons have been doing paid to play for a very, very long time.
Yes, it's their MO.
And even involved in NASA, I believe.
It's terrible.
From the very beginning.
All right.
Okay.
Well, listen, I'll talk to you soon, Queen Tut. Have a good day, and I'll get this out as quickly as possible.
Okay. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.